there, and welcome to Central Texas Gardener. I'm Tom Spencer. For us, winter doesn't close up shop in the garden. In fact, it can be our most beautiful season. Today, Kim and Mark Gaddy illustrate how to create a winter wonderland, even in small pockets, for your holiday guests. On tour, let's visit designer Tom Peace at home in his early spring garden.
Tom and Diane Peace are at home in Lockhart when spring hits Central Texas. A nurseryman and designer, Tom also writes about the challenges of layering a perennial garden in tough conditions. It's a topic especially close to home, since when the spring garden gives way to their summer perennials, they head to Colorado until fall, where Tom continues his design work and plant propagation. He brings some of them back to Lockhart to continue growing the plants he's found on worldly expeditions, ones that can stand up to Central Texas, even when you're not around to tend them every day. His own garden is a test ground for some of the plants he sells to nurseries and a testament to layering for seasonal evolution. But in 1991, when he and Diane first settled in, it was new ground to furnish.
The backyard was not a garden yet. It was clothesline poles and shed and a row of oleanders and lawn and the big trees that we have.
Over time, Tom turned the standard backyard into more than a privacy break between houses.
The two forms of structure are one, the perimeter, either done by plantings or fencing, and then the core structure of plants, the bones of the garden, whether they're palms or shrubs or agaves, yuccas, and those high-profile power plants, the ones that you can do everything else around in the garden, but they hold their own, they're center stage all year round.
Against them, he plays off the seasons, especially spring, with annuals and perennials that favor the heavy black clay soil and tempered shade.
When I first came to live in Texas, I was here only seasonally. And still am. So I was here for the winter season. So what I noticed were those plants, the cool season bulbs, the ephemerals, the blue bonnets, the wildflowers, and how they filled that seasonal niche.
As a plant globetrotter, Tom is always testing the limits of what can grow in a Lockhart backyard. As a gardener, he imagines how each space will look in the seasons to come.
And then I would layer under those plants that would come up in the hot season, so the garden wouldn't just be a wasteland, but it would have something that would continue to progress and grow into it. But it's mostly based on, this is when I'm here, this is when I'm outside, enjoying the garden, being in the garden. And it remains my greatest pursuit to encourage people in Central Texas, certainly to garden in the wintertime. I know there's a huge excitement and thrust to garden now that spring's here, but if you are out in October and November, you can plant a world of things to enjoy all winter long and into the spring, and many times with really wonderful weather, not so many mosquitoes, fire ants are at bay. It's a different experience to be out in the garden. This is my style, not that I invented it, but that I've adopted, and it is partly inspired by what I see in the wild. If I'm hiking in the mountains or in the woods or traveling to other countries and looking at wild floral displays, even sometimes what you'll see in the hill country or in Central Texas in the spring on good years, you will see both the large palette expanse of color. And sometimes you'll see, little exciting vignettes where you have, a rain lily up with a blue bonnet and an Indian paintbrush, and you see a combination of textures and colors that works, and that is inspirational. And you'll take that home and you recreate it, sometimes with the same plants, sometimes with others. But if I was to give the style of this garden a name, I'd call it controlled chaos. There's a certain amount of both elements, and they're not in opposition, but they kind of are both in play at any one time.
Paramount to his style is endeavoring a habitat for wildlife. Along with water and natural food sources, he plants tiered density for nesting and protection. He values leaf cover, a natural soil amendment for heavy soil, but also to shelter insects and lizards that take care of the garden when he's away. In his commercial greenhouse in Lockhart, Tom forges his travels, experiments, and homegrown experience to introduce gardeners at local nurseries to his discoveries. Although some of his finds are ephemeral, to be replanted next year, others carry on through freeze and drought, ready and waiting when he and Diane return from Colorado.
I will coddle things to a point to give them the best chance, but then, I'm gone for half a year and they're on their own. Those things that survive, survive with a little bit of help from our friends, and they have to be tough enough. There are aspects that are out of my control. There are aspects that I can control a little bit and that I influence and try to finesse, but a lot of times it's in the hands of other forces, certainly.
I always love seeing Tom Peace's landscapes. They're so alive, filled with color and movement and plants. Always a treat to see his work. Well, right now, we're going to whet your appetite with some things that will allow your garden to look a little bit like that this coming winter with lots of colorful plants. I'm joined by Mark and Kim Gaddy from Gaddy's Feed, Hardware, and Garden Center in Pflugerville. And welcome back to Central Texas Gardeners. Great to see you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I want to start off by letting people know about the business before we dive in and start talking about plants. And Mark, this has been a family business, and right now if folks stop in the nursery, I understand they'll meet 3 generations of Gaddies.
On Saturdays, a lot of times you'll see 3 of us there, yes. My father, who started the business back in '73, and then I joined in, and then now my son now is 15. So you'll see 3 Mr. Gaddys, and my daughter works there as well. She's 17.
3 Mr. Gaddys in one
betcha.
place. Okay. As long as they don't ask for pizza, you're in good shape.
That happens all the time.
I bet it does. I bet it does. Well, our subject today is winter color, and this is a lot of fun. This is something a lot of people really don't expect to be talking about during the wintertime. But I know that in your area you have lots of people moving in from out of state and from all over the nation, and you get to introduce them to something that maybe they're not used to having back where they come from.
Oh, it's one of the great benefits of living here in Central Texas is that we can really expand our growing season if you plant the right things, prepare your soil the right way.
Right.
You can have color almost all year long.
Right. And I like the fact that you say prepare your soil the right way, because just plucking things into the ground here in Central Texas is usually not a good idea. That's a little bit of homework that a lot of folks from other places may need to learn.
Yes, especially if you're planting annuals and have annual beds where you're removing maybe something that was growing there this summer that you need to remove some of those annuals and plant winter color there. When you make that change, we recommend putting a couple inches of compost in that soil, working it in so that it will feed the plants through the winter.
Right, right. Working that soil season after season is really the only way to do these kind of annual beds, I think, and it makes all the difference in the world. And there's a lot of great choices, and you've brought some really cool things with you. Now, most of the plants that we're going to be talking about today are really sun lovers, so that's one thing that people can note. But we're going to start with one that is kind of the opposite, and this is one plant that really likes the shade, and that's cyclamen. And this has become a hugely popular plant in recent years. Used to be kind of a rarity, but does extremely well in the shade.
Oh, and it's beautiful. The foliage, too, these little heart-shaped leaves that are variegated are pretty, as well as the blooms that can give you good color throughout the winter months. And, of course, now it does like the cold weather.
Right.
So that this is one that you might want to hold off in planting until we truly do cool down in Texas.
November for sure.
Yes, definitely.
But they can melt on these hot late fall days. But beautiful plant. The one thing that I would say on the cyclamen, lots of great color variation, and really eye-catching, popping color. But it's really important to have well-drained soil for those guys. So turn in the compost, maybe it's some kind of granite sand or something like that along with it. Now, moving to some plants for the sun, the ornamental cabbages and kales are a lot of fun to grow. And what kind of situations do you like using these in?
Well, you know, you can put these in mass plantings directly into your landscape.
Right.
You can also have this as kind of an accent or backdrop plant in a container. You know, I recommend kind of getting a larger one because they're kind of slow growing when you're planting them. You know, great thing about this plant is once we start really getting cold, sometimes it brings out some more color in it.
Absolutely.
Now I brought, this was more green and purple. In purple, there's also some white varieties for it. They'll add a little different pop in your landscape.
Well, Mark, folks are always looking for fragrance in the garden, and we have hiding back here a great plant for fragrance in the wintertime. This is a Alyssum. Must be a popular one.
Right. It makes a very good edge plant for a planter container because it'll droop over the sides, and also makes a real good border plant for in your beds.
Yeah, that's exactly how I like to use it. Is tuck it in with some other plants so it'll kind of drape over the edge of the pot or the hanging basket, and it's great for hanging baskets. It's right there at nose level,
right?
And it's a very powerful fragrance. Some people, it's maybe a little strong for some people, but I love it, and it comes in a couple different color forms. And again, does great all the way through the winter. And it doesn't really expire until those first few hot days, and then it's just gone. And that but it'll go all the way through the spring. Coming up next here, one of my favorite plant families is the Dianthus. And this is a great plant. Comes in many different forms. Some are annual, some are perennial. Love these plants. How do they perform for you?
Oh, well, this is just one of the hardest working plants. It's easy maintenance. You know, the great thing about this Dianthus, this is the annual type of Dianthus here, but a lot of times this will overwinter and then keep going right on into the spring and summer, and depending on what location you have it in. I really like this, and you can get there's a variety with red flowers mixed. It also has a nice shape to the plant.
Right. It's a very compact, tidy plant. It's easy to pinch off the spent blooms. Sometimes with some of the winter annuals, it requires a little bit of maintenance. You got to get in there and remove the faded blooms. This is a very easy one to do. And again, these deep, rich colors that you get are really special. And I have to admit, my favorite forms are the Silverleaf forms, the perennials. Those are awesome, and they will sometimes last for a generation. I mean, I have one that's 20 years old that's in a container. But they are really terrific plants, so people should be on the lookout for all the different forms of Dianthus. Right in here next to it, perfect foil for the Dianthus, or a lot of the other plants that we're talking about, is Dusty Miller with this beautiful silver foliage. And this is another great winter sun plant, right?
Oh, yes, and you know, it will help make some of your other more color plants look even brighter in the garden.
Right.
Dusty Miller works well. I didn't bring one. The Artemisia is also another nice silver accent plant to have in your garden.
A little bit larger accent.
Yes.
A little more aggressive accent, but it's still a great accent plant, right? Yeah. And right beside that, we saw the cabbage. Then here we have an ornamental kale, and you can tell the difference because of the frilled ridges there. And great color on this one, and they perform really well in the same kind of situations, mass plantings or in containers. Now here we come to, I think, probably the most popular of the annuals for the wintertime, and it's the pansies and the violas. Now, what is your trick for when you tell customers how to grow them? What do you tell them?
Well, I mean, besides putting the compost and everything in the bed, blood meal works really well to make them grow and pop.
Yeah, I really think blood meal is a great addition. And this is one where I talked about the importance of maintenance a little bit. You know, I think the more you remove the faded blooms, the more blooms you'll get. So it's one of those things where if you have it in a hanging basket, getting in the habit of coming through and pinching off the faded blooms makes a big difference in terms of the amount of color that you get. and also seems to keep the plants more vibrant and alive longer into the springtime. But lots of the color variation on this is enormous. I mean, there's pretty much everything under the rainbow.
Oh, I only brought a few of the colors that they come in, and you know, so you can really pick a color that accents your house, your other landscaping.
Yeah. You just can't go wrong. And I have to submit, I have a particular love of the little violas, or Johnny jump-ups as they're sometimes called, and that just the smaller flower, but again, a big payoff in terms of the amount of blooms that you get from the plant. Just really terrific. We're going to continue over here with some plants that are edible. And these are things that, you know, I once did a whole garden of lettuce for the winter time in about 15 different varieties, and it was so much fun. All the different colors of the rainbow, practically, and that's a really good thing for people to try during the wintertime here.
Oh, it's beautiful, and you can eat, depending on how you're spraying, you know, you can eat out of your flower beds as well.
Right.
That's a red lettuce, and as it grows, it might get a little deeper red
I'm sure
along the
it will.
edges.
Yeah.
And then that's just regular cabbage, and even though it doesn't have the same shape right now, it will develop a more round head of cabbage that just looks beautiful.
Yeah, and here's the cabbage right here. And you're right, the form, the head of the cabbage itself is like a giant flower, and in essence that's what it is. And it's very attractive in the garden during the wintertime as well. So these are a couple of other things that you can, and you don't have to have them all in a vegetable bed. You can mix them right in with the ornamentals, and it's a great way to go. Now, a few other things to think about are seeding things out right now, and this is a great time for that. And while we're talking about the edibles, let's start with talking about chard, because this has become very popular as a plant for both use as an edible, but also look at the color on some of these leaves. This is great.
Oh, vibrant, almost fluorescent stems and some of the varieties of the Swiss chard, and very hardy.
Yeah.
We've had some alive in our garden for 2 years now.
Yeah. Well, this is it's a wonderful thing to have, and it's delicious. I love chard, cooked in many different ways. Some people use it as like a wrap and they'll cook things in it. It's absolutely wonderful that way. And also, this is time for planting larkspur and so many other of the beautiful springtime flowers. So you can seed out now with these things.
Yeah, and you can't, you know, it's one of the things you have to think about doing now, because once you start thinking about spring, it's too late to get them started.
Okay, so folks can look for you at Gaddy's in Pflugerville, and we hope that people will do that. Thanks so much for being on Central Texas Garden.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Coming up next, it's time for Daphne.
Hello and welcome to Down to Earth. You'll see our guest horticulturist, Augie, is back with us today. And our question this week is from Gail, who has a fruit tree, a peach tree, that she would like to know if she can prune right now. Normally you would not prune any fruit trees right now, or any other trees really very much as well. But fruit trees especially, because you are pruning out some of the buds for next year, but more importantly, you're pruning out some of the growth. If you prune it out improperly, you're encouraging it to grow, so you don't want to do that. This particular tree has very heavy limbs, and it does need a lot of correcting. You'll notice that it's growing a lot on one side, it has a bunch of branches down on the ground. So Gail does need to go ahead and remove those branches and kind of balance the tree, bring it back into balance. And so what you need to do if you're going to prune this time of year is remove all of those limbs that are a hazard, the ones that are on the ground are a tripping hazard. So you do need to prune those all the way back to the source, all the way back to the branch that they came from or to the main trunk. And when you do that, you don't encourage the tree to branch any further, breaking buds if you cut all the way back to the source. So that's the proper way to prune this time of year. Our plant this week is cedar sage, Salvia romeriana. This is a perennial salvia. It's native to the Edwards Plateau under ash juniper trees. So it does grow very well for us in the shade. It gets 1 to 2 feet tall and then would have a 1-foot flower stalk. It does great in the shade, as I said, and it does need very well-drained soil since it's native to that rocky plateau. You don't want to overwater this plant, especially if you have it in a little bit of a heavy soil. It has beautiful heart-shaped hairy leaves, unlike some of our salvias that have smaller leaves. It has gorgeous tubular crimson flowers, and it does flower all summer long, from early spring through late summer. As I said, it's a perennial, so it dies to the ground in the winter, and it's hardy to 0 degrees. Some of these last winter we may have lost because we got down so much colder than that. It does establish very quickly, filling in beds by reseeding prolifically. As I said, it's native under our ash juniper trees, which is where it gets its name, cedar sage, because we commonly call junipers cedar around here. To do in your garden this week, it's still time to plant some cool season vegetables and herbs, such as carrots and radishes, and lettuces and spinach, even lemon balm, cilantro, and chamomile. Those are some great herbs for us to grow now that it's cool season. We'd love to hear from you. Please visit klru.org/ctg to send us your question or a plant of the week from your garden.
Thanks, Daphne. Now let's check in with William Glenn for Backyard Basics.
Hi there and welcome to Backyard Basics. I'm William Glenn. Today we're going to talk a little bit about bulbs, in particular naturalizing bulbs. A naturalizing bulb is pretty much what it sounds like it is. It's one that you can put in the ground and it's going to naturally take off. Basically, nature is going to tell it what it's going to do, how it's going to go through its life cycle, and hopefully it's going to expand, give us more bulbs in the future that we can get a bigger swath of color or maybe share with our friends if we choose to divide them out. We're going to go through some of the superstars of Texas naturalized bulbs, but before we do that, I'd like to just take a little bit of time to talk to you about working the soil, working with what you've got to really increase the chances that we're going to have success with these bulbs. First of all, we want to choose a spot that's a sunny location. That's critical for that flower development. And we don't really want to write off some of the spaces that are under trees. Trees usually are not sunny spots, you think, but what happens a lot of time is most of our trees around here are actually deciduous, which means they're going to lose their leaves, and a lot of these bulbs are going to be spring bulbs. So that means they're going to be going into their bloom cycle when these leaves are not on the trees. So it brings color into an otherwise perhaps drab area. We want to choose a spot that drains very well. Bulbs don't like to be wet for long periods of time. It can actually create rot, and I would say that's probably the #1 reason that bulbs fail, is they get too much love, too much water. We also want to make sure that when we're working with these bulbs that we give them plenty of food. They have to store a lot of food for their dormant periods and for their blooming periods. It takes a lot of energy for a flower to do what it does. Some of the things that traditionally gardeners have used are bone meal, soft rock phosphates, but nowadays we have some specifically designed fertilizers just for bulbs that are fantastic. Slow release organic fertilizers that give the bulbs everything they need. I always spray my bulbs with a solution of liquid seaweed before I plant them, and sometimes I'll even spray them with the liquid seaweed and roll them right in that fertilizer so I know that they're making good contact and that they've got those nutrients right at their beck and call whenever they need them. So let's jump into some of the stars. There are some fantastic naturalizing bulbs both for the fall and for the spring around here in central Texas. One of my favorites is the oxblood lily. This is just a fantastic big maroon bloom that has yellow stamens, nice contrast. Sometimes it's called a hurricane lily. Schoolhouse lily is another common name. Both refer to the time in which it blooms, which is September. Kids are going back to school in September, so they get that name, schoolhouse lily, for that reason. The spider lily, also known as by its botanical name, the Lychee radiata, is a fantastic little red bloom as well, but this one has stamens that are actually longer than the petals or sepals on the plant, and so what you get is a real firework looking, very unusual looking bloom on that. The narcissus and the daffodils, these are famous. When one thinks of narcissus, typically they think of the paper whites, the white flowers that are grown around the holidays, maybe in bowls on the kitchen table. But there are a lot of naturalizing narcissi too. Narcissi is a word, or you can also say narcissuses, but either way it sounds weird to me. But the daffodils are in the same family, and the daffodils, there are a whole bunch of them. The Erlenmeer is one variety, Delibes is another one. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right either. But, and then a third is the tete-a-tete. But these are all fantastic shades of peach, orange, yellow, white, and various combinations of those colors. Really fantastic and slightly poisonous, which you don't want to keep them near your onions. That could have some pretty disastrous results. But the positive side of that is that you usually don't get animals messing with them. So, moving on, the summer snowflake is also called a laden lily. The Leucojum aestivum, I believe, is what it is. And this is a big old bulb that produces one of the most elegant and graceful flowers you'll ever see. I think it's just fantastic. Little umbels of white flowers that face downward. Just a really beautiful little flower. And then finally, my favorite, the Muscari neglectum. As the name indicates, it is one that can be neglected and it will really thrive. You see it sometimes on the green belts around central Austin and around central Texas. You'll see it. It's a blue little hyacinth, a grape hyacinth is the common name, and it reaches a maximum height of only about 6 inches. But what it does is lay down these beautiful swaths of blue, real nice indigos, and it has a grape-like scent. Just a really interesting and beautiful little bulb, really easy to cultivate. So follow some of these basic techniques of planting. Good sunny spot, make sure they don't stay too wet, and then choose based on ones that we know do well around here, and eventually you'll have a big palette of beautiful naturalized bulbs in your yard. For Backyard Basics, I'm William Glenn. We'll see you next time.
Visit klru.org/CTG to watch online, get more tips, and read our blog. Next week, meet alternatives to invasive plants. Until then, I'll see you in the garden.
To learn about today's program, watch online, and follow CTG's blog, check out klru.org/CTG.